Good morning. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm just having some coffee and readjusting my space a bit, getting a little more comfortable. Hey, Gord. Good morning. I'm glad someone's here with me. I always assume that as soon as I get on, it's just going to be me talking to myself. So, oh, wow. Well, thanks for the subscription. I really appreciate it. Um, Hopefully I'll be an affiliate soon, and then who knows what happens after that. I don't actually know, to be honest. I'm not really quite sure how Twitch works exactly. I guess I just have to get a lot of people to watch me pretty regularly. Hey Puka, thanks for following. I love all the tentacles. That's fantastic, and the disco ball. Um, I'm kind of jealous, actually, of that emote, to be honest. Um, yeah, I've kind of reorganized my space a little bit. I put my cat's carpet clad tower in the background there, so perhaps when he lounges around, waiting for the automatic cat box to go, which seems to be a favorite activity of his, perhaps he'll lounge around on screen instead of just off screen as he's been doing in the past, so that only I could enjoy him. We'll see. We'll see. No promises. I don't know. He might be a little camera shy. Um, so, thanks. Yes, that shovel's been sitting around for quite a while in my closet and sometimes in my car. Um, so I actually brought it out for part of an actual play where I played necromancer, literal gravedigger necromancer. Um, so it's been kind of near my computer for a while, and I put it back there, and yeah, everybody loves the shovel, so there it is. Someone told me it's my boar spear, whatever that means. I guess that's a Markiplier reference. Um, yeah, and praise Caine. So I'm glad I'm not the only one who uses the praise Caine emoji now. That's great. Um, I know I have a few emojis. I don't know if they all work, or even exactly how people get them, but they're there. I added them. I know they exist. Um, so I guess they're kind of harder to see in dark mode. So as I usually do, feel free to ask any questions if you have questions, whether related to what I'm talking about or not. I'll pause and answer them as best I can when I get a moment. Um, and I'm going to pick up where I left off before, talking about the Black Hand playing the Sabbat. And Sabbat, Vampire the Masquerade in general, RPGs. We don't have to talk just about my books. That would, I don't know if that'd be boring, but that's obviously in a limited supply. There are a lot more books to talk about than mine. Though obviously, the ones I know the most about are the book. Um, okay. Um, okay. Wonderful. Yes. Well, as much as you can listen, the better. Feel free to chime in if you can. Um, but don't worry. Let the my soothing, melodious voice ease your travails at work, at least. Um, so last I left off, and I upload all these videos to YouTube. I believe actually I'm current on YouTube. I believe the 4 previous streams I've uploaded to YouTube. I used to do some video editing and put it up there, but I found that I just the videos aren't really just like long enough or complicated enough for all that work. So I found that I'm just downloading the streams and putting them up there with like a fancy fun thumbnail, and that's about it. And I think that works well for now. If I do longer streams and I need to actually cut up the individual streams into shorter videos to satisfy YouTube's algorithm, then maybe I'll return to video editing at some future point. But So far, it really hasn't seemed to be worth the effort. A lot of the video editing software, at least the ones available to me, a little clunky, a little clunky. So we'd actually made it into chapter 1 finally. It's only taken what 4 or 5 streams now to get there. So we're past the introduction. We've talked about Sabbat tenets and kind of the mechanical ideas behind how we design Paths of Enlightenment in this book. For ease of play, we talked a little bit about Priest as a PC. And now we're actually getting into the paths themselves and basically how we designed them and saw them in the game. And I guess I'm just going to go over each individual path that we talk about and perhaps why we didn't, detail some paths or others. And I think that could be of use. Okay, I see. I see, Gord. You had a session 0 with a second ongoing V5 game using the Black Hand, Apaca Raiders in Belgrade, dealing with the triumvirate of bishops there. Oh, well, cool, great. Well, that's what I love to hear. I love hearing that people are, making use of the book, and that it, you're able to tell your own stories with it. Obviously, we don't talk about Belgrade in the book or anything like that. So obviously, that's all of your own design, which is wonderful. And I'm glad that the Black Hand is of use there. And Belgrade, I think, is a great setting, especially if you're planning on doing some Gehenna War related stuff. I think Europe is a wonderful little place for, doing these like wartime or intrigue stories. I'm more of an intrigue story person, but I feel V5 kind of has leaned a bit more into the open warfare kind of story, and that's certainly what we see in all the almost all of the video game content, at least the stuff that isn't visual novels. It seems to be this kind of like open vampire war. So the Masquerade must. Everybody knows the Masquerade's broken, but everybody's still pretending to keep it up. I guess that's the open secret, which actually isn't too far from the truth when you think about it. I know in the Second Inquisition book, we kind of talked about that a little bit, and I'm sure I've mentioned it before. That within the Second Inquisition, which is kind of an informal grouping as it is, there are different factions, and that one of the more hardline factions, led by the entity, basically the Vatican's kind of like, secret police in the world of darkness, and also, supported by other, powerful reactionary forces within that coalition, that their greatest fear is basically a complete breakdown of the Masquerade, though they don't call it the Masquerade, but a complete breakdown of the secret of the supernatural, that the world would, discover publicly that the supernatural is real, that vampires exist. And instead of, hey there, Astriarch, thanks for following, appreciate it. And instead of, banding together and supporting the Second Inquisition or these hunters in destroying them all, they would come to some kind of entente or understanding with the supernatural. They would make some kind of, True Blood-esque peace with the vampires. And that was really the greatest fear of some of the more reactionary factions of the Second Inquisition. And basically, their red line for participating in the informal grouping is basically circumventing that, preventing that out in any way. Which is interesting. It's a fun way to think about things, that their concern is that there might actually be a way to live with vampires or the supernatural or come to some kind of accord with them, but they have no interest in that for various reasons, depending upon who's in the faction. obviously part of the story of the Second Inquisition book. I mean, this is off topic, but I'll wrap it up here. Part of the story of the Second Inquisition book is that these groups have basically stolen power and resources from their countries and governments and people to hunt vampires. They've done it all in secret, and it's a vast quantity of resources that they've stolen. And for most of them, it has become just a way to not necessarily enrich themselves, but to push their own political agendas and ideologies. They may say that their concern is, hunting the supernatural and monsters or whatever, but now that they have access to all these clandestine, secret, violent organizations with global reach, they're going to use that to eliminate their political enemies and to empower themselves not only globally against their foreign enemies, but to also use those resources to undermine, destroy, imprison their domestic enemies. And that's part of the story of the Second Inquisition, that it is a mortal organization, and at the end of the day, their greatest weakness, and one reason why they haven't been completely successful, is that their main priority actually isn't destroying vampires or rooting out the supernatural. Their main priority is their own political power, and they're going to use those stolen resources to do that, to empower themselves. And that probably means that most of the Second Inquisition's time and resources is probably used to target other mortals. It's probably not, probably the amount of resources and time the Second Inquisition actually spends destroying, vampires and werewolves, I would suspect, wouldn't even be 50%. And yeah, in some cases, they're targeting mortals that are working for the supernatural. Sure, that's possible. But they could also be targeting mortals who are just in their way, who are inconvenient to them politically, who they can tar and paint as, somehow linked to the supernatural, and therefore point the resources of the Inquisition as a whole at them. So that was a little off topic, but I think somewhat of interest, especially as we get in deeper into the Black Hand. As you were saying, Astriarch, I'm glad that you're planning on using the Black Hand in your game. Istanbul is a very interesting city. I've only been there once. I was very young when I went to Istanbul. I only spent a day or two there. It's a very beautiful ancient city, and I'm sure it would make a fantastic setting for a vampire. And yeah, I could see that as being a very interesting logistics center for Gehenna War / Gehenna Crusade, Jihad, Linked Chronicles. Obviously, Syria and Iraq are and parts of Ukraine are kind of mentioned pretty frequently when we talk about Gehenna War stuff. But I would say that really the Gehenna War can be anywhere, and that it probably would be fun to throw your players a curveball where they kind of have to double back to some place, quote unquote civilized, to maybe do something particularly violent. Perhaps these as kind of one thing that I like to point to actually is the rewritten Gehenna War chapter. Obviously I rewrote it, so it's of interest to me, in the Cambria book, which basically where the narrator, obviously he may be unreliable, may have his own agenda, where the narrator basically says that the Beckoning is false, and that all these elders that he was ordered by the Justicar, by his Justicar to find, are basically hiding out, and that they're basically have summoned him to, kill him, to end his life, or at least he assumes they're going to kill him, and then we never hear from him again. So maybe that's it. And I believe they actually summon him, if I haven't read that chapter in quite a while, but if my recollection is correct, they actually summon him to Venice, in Italy. So not to, the Middle East or even Ukraine or someplace like war-torn. They actually, summon him back to the heart of civilized, quiet, peaceful, cultured, touristy Europe. That's where the end of him happens. Um, so yeah, that could be interesting. Whether those elders are actually being beckoned or are there to hide out until everything blows over. That's all. Those are all can make very interesting stories. Um, and yeah, and Istanbul does have a lot of stray cats. Algiers, and Algeria also has a lot of stray cats. Stray cats, and in Greece, actually, the most stray cats I've ever seen anywhere in my life was in Greece, specifically in Crete for some reason. I don't know why that is, but it was quite a lot of stray cats in Heraclon. Um, so I will continue with the book. Um, and yeah, and the second Inquisition, I think, is an interesting wrinkle in Vampire the Masquerade overall. It brings a kind of, I guess, X-Files component to Vampire the Masquerade, and you know, that interesting aspect of, like mortal intrigue, and that they're mortals who know of the supernatural. I mean, for the most part, they're directly oppositional to mortals. When originally writing the Second Inquisition book, we were actually going to have, I don't know if it's still called this, but we are going to have a whole section basically about, turncoats, basically vampires who work for the Second Inquisition. Mostly, the caitiffs, thin bloods, and, a few others who basically made common cause with the Second Inquisition. But that was I guess they didn't feel that was really on brand with the overall product and IP. So I think most of that stuff was actually turned to like ghouls, and like ghouls who'd been like kind of subverted by the Second Inquisition, that kind of thing. And very few actual, it wasn't really shown that vampires were a major thing. I think there are some, kind of like chained vampires that they had that we'd written up, but I don't know if those actually made it into the book. Yet again, Second Inquisition is a book I haven't actually cracked open in quite a while, even though I wrote significant parts of it. And I know one part of that book that got kind of cut out was I wrote a lot of stuff about the kind of like military hardware that the Second Inquisition would have access to, like Reaper drones and like Spectre gunships and all that. A bit of my kind of like real world expertise coming into gaming, which doesn't happen that often. Um, Basically, just the kind of section on like cyber warfare, AI, kind of the heartbeat algorithm, and some military hardware and the such. Kind of made it into the Second Inquisition from my own experiences, which is kind of interesting actually. Like the heartbeat algorithm, actually, that concept came from uh, what I'd saw as a study, actually from an idea from a study of metadata I'd read. Okay, well, good. I'm glad the Reaper drones and Spectre gunships did make it in. I have a special place in my heart for the Spectre gunship. It just has a cool name and is just a ridiculous weapons platform that someone basically slapped that together and all that. I know they're decommissioned, but I made it. I put in a special line that the Second Inquisition had basically, under the guise of them being decommissioned, had basically absconded with like a bunch of them, and was kind of keeping them hidden and in reserve for particularly nasty, um, you know, uh, in extremis circumstances. Since that's not really something you'd want to use, in a downtown populated area, um, unless you basically had no regard for human life whatsoever. Which, there you go. Um, but the heartbeat algorithm was really a concept that came together because of metadata studies that was really interested in. Did all these metadata studies, basically just off of like cell phone data and tracking people's usage of the internet. So nothing that would be considered quote unquote privileged, I guess. And of course, we would learn from the Snowden leaks that the government, the U.S. government, and its what are called the Five Eyes, basically the English-speaking global and colonial powers that kind of work together to run the world. UK, England, Australia, and so on. I mean, really, it's the U.S. and those are just satrapies like the U.K., Australia. Those are barely independent countries in actuality. Um, but at least as far as their foreign policy is concerned, domestically they can kind of do what they want. Um, but basically, how the Snowden leaks revealed that the U.S. government, in coordination with those other English-speaking countries and their intelligence services, were basically spying on the whole world, but especially American citizens, and not just their metadata. But that's neither here nor there. Mostly the heartbeat algorithm came from reading up on metadata studies, which I think this was a Princeton study in the 2000s that basically showed that through metadata, you could discern a whole lot about people, and what not only what they were thinking and feeling or whatever, like politically kind of writ large from 5 miles up, but really their day to day life. You could tell, if they were religious, what their religion was, basically what communities they hang out with, their work schedule. They were able to discern if people were pregnant, what kind of pets they had, their relationship with individual family members, and in some cases they could kind of ascertain infidelities and things like that. The pregnancy thing was actually particularly interesting to me. That they were able basically to kind of ascertain, that level of detail in someone's life just from their metadata, just from basically the timestamps and geolocations from their phone. So not the actual like texts or emails that they were sending, just the kind of wrappers around those texts and emails. So the fact that they could basically just churn that out through, and this is before what we're now calling AI was prevalent. So this was, through like brute force database milling, not through what we call, AI, the large language models, which are so common nowadays, which I'm sure could ascertain even more detailed information about us from that metadata. And of course, as we know from the Snowden leaks, of course, the U.S. government has access to basically all the text within your emails and every DM or text you send. Except for perhaps signal texts. Maybe we're not quite sure about that. As we know from the Snowden leaks, the U.S. government, especially the CIA, has basically infiltrated most professional organizations that deal with internet security and even the infrastructure of the internet. Those professional associations, they basically send people in covertly to work with those organizations without their knowledge, in hopes of discovering, zero-day exploits and such that they would just, keep to themselves. They would never report and exploit them when they need to exploit them, which, has already caused in the past some, global shenanigans, as we saw with the cyber worm during the Obama administration. Which obviously was the Olympic Games joint cyber warfare program between the U.S. and Israel that targeted Iran's, nuclear science infrastructure, but actually spread globally and caused major disruptions. Now, I'll get back on topic. Sorry, sorry about all that. I was talking about the Path of Caine, yes, and yeah, unfortunately, yes, the Australian government is. The UK government is not much better, but the Australian government has kind of a almost almost comical obsequience to the U.S. Regardless of who's in power in the U.S. It's quite funny. I think even in the 70s. an Australian prime minister was dismissed, like fired, uh, from his job, like an elected prime minister, the head of their government technically was fired by I think like the crown representative because they're technically they have a king now but a queen back then, like in the 70s because he clashed with the U.S. government. It was kind of crazy, and the Australians just like, oh okay, he was fired obviously, like didn't you just vote that guy in? Like why weren't there riots? Are you crazy? But I'm sure there was some excuse for why he was fired that wasn't, because him and the U.S. were not getting along. Um, all right, yeah. So you obviously know much more about it than yeah since Go Whitlam. Right. So you know much more about it than I do, I'm sure. But yeah, it's a very interesting story. You just Google it, look it up. Sometimes I feel they do these things just so that when you talk about them, you sound crazy. That's always been a suspicion of mine. That you could never sound crazier than the reality of how the world works. That has been my experience. I've worked in the oil and gas field for 20 years, especially in North Africa, the Middle East. I worked in shipping. I worked in New York real estate briefly, and of course I worked in tech briefly. But I can say from my long experience in the oil and gas world, which is obviously a very politically minded sector of the economy globally and especially in the U.S., that you could never conceive of a crazier situation than the way the world actually works. The way the world actually works. That your strangest conspiracy theories, while I'm sure are wrong, like don't misconstrue what I'm saying, probably wouldn't be as weird as the world actually works. I mean, from my experience, it actually is basically just a group of people who know each other and have class solidarity because they're filthy rich and their interests align, and they basically pat each other on the back. They employ each other's children, and it's a self-perpetuating global aristocracy. Um, so not so that is a really great segue into Vampire the Masquerade. Um, so we were talking about the Path of Caine, and in this book, all the paths basically take their lead from the V5, the official V5 Sabbat book, Sabbat the Black Hand. Um, and so these paths aren't necessarily exactly the same as they were defined in legacy materials, especially V20 and revised. Um, I actually prefer them now than from V20 and revised because I actually feel they're closer thematically to their original context and original writing. I feel, and I've spoken about this in the past, that in revised and therefore in V20, which is mostly just a continuation of revised, obviously. I feel in revised there was a distinct editorial effort to basically turn the Sabbat into kind of Camarilla light. This it's the dark mirror Camarilla. They espouse freedom and all this stuff and fight against the antediluvians, but actually they're just like the Camarilla and they're just hypocrites and it's all bullshit. So I felt that these paths, though they're a bit different than as they're presented or revised, and different than what you saw in the Player's Guide to the Sabbat in second edition. I should find a picture of the cover of that book since I speak about it pretty regularly, so you know what I'm talking about, which I kind of consider the gold standard Sabbat book, the Player's Guide for the Sabbat, and then to a lesser extent the Storyteller's Guide to the Sabbat, and if you want a little flavor, but please don't take it too seriously, 30 Secrets of the Black Hand, which I think is a great read and a lot of fun, and kind of is the first inklings of what you'd call a Gehenna War kind of chronicle. Literally that book has a whole section on playing Sabbat Elders, and globetrotting, and going basically globally with your pack of Sabbat elders to just fuck shit up. So it's basically the Gehenna War concept, 20 years ago, and personally done very, very well. Um, though that is not the heart of the book. I feel that section was kind of added to the book because a very successful book came out before it called Elysium, which was basically about playing elders in Vampire the Masquerade, and that was a fantastic book, very well done for its time. Um, and basically they wanted some parallel to that, basically Elysium for the Sabbat, and so that was put in Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand. Most of the stuff in Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand, I would say, unfortunately, is not really Sabbat related. It is basically a book about a third sect, the true Black Hand, Tal Marahi as we know it, and all that, which in V5 basically doesn't exist anymore. Or at the very least, I should say it. I have no special knowledge of that, so all the regular caveats. I can simply say that the Tal Marahi True Hand, as far as I have seen, has not been presented to me as something I should concern myself with as a writer on official books. Okay, so maybe it'll be revealed that it exists still in the future. I don't know. I have no idea. I haven't seen anything about it. Yeah, I think the current paths are good, and and that's a good point, Gord, in that the current paths aren't. They're kind of. Some people would call them dumbed down, I guess, from the paths that you were used to from, say, Revised or even from Second Edition Sabbat, which is fair. They were definitely simplified in Sabbat the Black Hand, the V5 book, which is kind of an antagonist book or monster manual. And it is a so it was done that way so that STs could kind of signal what paths certain Sabbat were on without having to really go in the details, right? So there was a lot of emphasis on the way certain path adherents looked, the kind of symbology they used, the things they were interested in. So a lot of kind of outward surface stuff. The kind of inner life of a path follower was talked about a bit, but it really wasn't the focus, right? Just like in a monster manual, I want to know how hard the ogre hits. I'm not really concerned about why he voted, Republican in the last 3 elections. I'm not really concerned about his internal dialogue or how he grew up in his family that led him to be, a lifelong Republican voter. I just want to know how many hit points the ogre has, his initiative, and, saving throws, that kind of thing. I just need to know how to use him in the fight. Maybe that information would be useful if the characters try to get into a dialogue with him, see where he's coming from, or of course if he's interviewed by the New York Times, since they seem to like to interview conservatives nonstop. So we took that as a jumping off point. Orphans of Enoch. Gord, I don't know if I've seen that reference. I'll look that up. Maybe I'll Google that and see. I know there's an unofficial True Hand Tal Marahi book on the STV. In our adventure Lost in the Garden, written by Steffi Devon, which is a fantastic book and adventure. We have a sidebar that basically says that this is how you could include the True Hand in the adventure if you wish to kind of add an extra layer of intrigue or meta plot to the adventure. But it's not, you don't have to do that. It's not necessary for the adventure to work, but it does have a note or a sidebar including the True Hand. And I think it does actually use some stuff from the True Hand book, but nothing that, makes it necessary for the main NPC to be True Hand or Tal Marahi or whatnot. But I would say that the path that's presented in this book, basically we take the official V5 Sabbat, the Black Hand book, and I wrote a lot of the Rite and path stuff in that book actually, So I was very comfortable with their presentation in that book. So we took that and expanded on them. We got deeper. Like we felt there was a good surface area, and that was kind of nice in that we were able to really deep dive into these paths. Um, I would say some of them are pretty significantly changed. Path of Caine, which I always thought of as a very kind of studious book nerd path in original Sabbat, has become a lot more visceral. That's a lot more about modeling your behavior on Caine and on the ancient texts, the Word, the Book of Nod, and the such. So it's a lot more of a pragmatic, ecstatic, not I won't not necessarily evangelical, but though that there is parts of that, but it's much more a path about living, not the gospel, but living the Word of Caine, as it were, and a lot less about reading the books and doing the homework. Um, so that is, I feel that's a very interesting kind of transformation of the path in a way, and I think for play, um, that is good, to be honest. Uh, so like I feel you could still play the Path of Caine nerd, but the main kind of focus of the path is more on the doing than the studying, which is basically the transformation of the Sabbat as a whole. It's more about getting things done. It's more about the pragmatic applications of defeating the antediluvians than spending a lot of time kind of pontificating about how we're going to get it done. Oh, well, yeah, thank you. I felt the each path kind of having its own, as we call them, tekbir, which obviously comes from Islam and Arab and Muslim culture. Um, at least that word. But of course, we all know the callback. We all know Amen and all that. So the idea that each path would kind of have its own, signal of praise or affirmation of a sermon, that kind of thing. I thought that would be pretty interesting. Some are pretty universal. Obviously, Praise Caine is it's a pretty good one. I think most paths would be pretty comfortable saying Praise Caine, except obviously the Path of Lilith. They probably would shy away from that, or even be made uncomfortable by it in some cases. Um, so we tried to sprinkle in a few interesting ones for each path. We didn't want them all to be the same, and we wanted them all to have a little flavor or a signal about what the path was about or what its adherents were like. Um, so we go into the paths. We talk about them. We kind of talk about their modern incarnation within the Sabbat as we saw them. Um, Obviously, you're going to change them as it's required for your game. You're going to role play a Path of Caine or a Path whatever vampire as you wish. We do give some role play notes. Um, that is partially coming from my experience and point of view as a LARPer, and all the other writers on this book are also very experienced LARPers. Um, and so we thought it would be useful to give roleplay tips for the individual paths, since paths are basically as important or possibly more important than clan within the spot, and how to define and personalize your character. And I think we even talk about how they dress. I thought that was in the role play. Yeah, yeah. So so that's also obviously from LARPing experience, that kind of like costuming concept. That is not necessarily a be all end all. Like, we say here, Noddists see vanity as a mortal weakness and tend to wear solid colors such as black, red, or white unless celebrating a high holiday. Um, and, that's one line, a little bit of a long sentence, but still just one sentence about how they dress. Obviously, not all members of the Path of Caine are going to dress the same. It was just kind of give you a conception of them, and also to double down on how adverse they are to adopting mortal society and mortal ways, um, and how that's anathema to them. And as I've spoken about in previous streams, how that is perhaps a weakness of the Sabbat, or something exploitable about the Sabbat is basically their how they're just not willing to use mortals directly and effectively. At best they see them as tools. Thanks for the follow, Emajad Babe. Um, my glad to have you. Um, and For the Path of Caine, they kind of take that to the extreme. They're really, in my conception of the main paths we detail here, obviously Path of the Beast and Path of Orion, those kind of like other paths that we don't really detail here, possibly are more mortal exclusive than Path of Caine. But of the major paths we detail here, I'd say Path of Caine is the most mortal exclusive. They really don't want you kind of falling back into your mortal ways, and that includes kind of too much camaraderie or reliance on mortals. And I think mostly what's most of use to people here, obviously, is the path convictions, which I'll get into. But we also detail their most common touchstone rite. I spoke about touchstone rite last stream. But basically, the Sabbat touchstones, instead of being mortals, are the rite themselves, to which they attach convictions that are related to their path. And so you probably want to find convictions that make sense to the rite. Excuse me. And so we wanted each path, therefore, to have certain rite, which are often associated with their convictions. So we have a little touchstone section. Here we basically say Devourers. That's the name created for Path of Caine adherents in V5. Obviously, more classically, they're known as Nodists. Though now I feel in V5 and Vampire in general, the term Nodist doesn't necessarily mean that you follow the Path of Caine. I feel that the term Nodist more broadly means that you are someone who studied the Book of Nod, perhaps you believe it, and that you probably are religious or have some more than scholarly interest in the Book of Nod. And perhaps you are religious, and that there are parts of the Book of Nod that you've adopted to model your life after. That's what I would think the kind of term Nodist more broadly encompasses. Followers of the Path of Caine are kind of, I would say, the OG Nodists. And then now we have the Church of Caine, which I would also say are Nodists, though their relationship with the Book of Nod is more complicated. I don't really know what a real world example would be to basically a religion. Well, I don't really want to make real world examples. I feel that's not very fair to real world. Yes, I would call Beckett a Nodist, right? So he studies the Book of Nod. He's interested in all those myths and legends and scraps, and he hunts them down. And he's obviously very dedicated to it on an academic level. And in his original conception as a character, he was basically kind of a Scully type. He was kind of Scully and Fox Mulder combined. If you know sorry for the X-Files reference. I know it's a billion years old, but so am I, as you can tell from the big fat beard. So he was kind of both characters in one, in that he was the dedicated I want to believe guy and the skeptic all rolled into one. The only thing is he was basically confronted with the reality of his skepticism being disproven over and over again, which is kind of funny since, he is a vampire. And, of course, his adopted sire, Aristotle de Laurent, is literally the guy who, wrote the Book of Nod. Well, wrote is kind of not quite right. the guy who compiled the Book of Nod as we know it today, which is part of the reason we came up with the concept of the Word, kind of Apocrypha and other texts that aren't in the Book of Nod, but maybe could have been in the Book of Nod if de Laurent hadn't cut them or didn't think they hit some benchmark of academic credulity. The fact that Beckett was kind of a skeptic was always kind of funny, since he's like, I can believe in vampires and shapeshifting and all this stuff, but that's too far. In Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 1, of course, he's kind of a funny NPC in that regard as well, studying over the sarcophagus and all that. And also in Vampire the Masquerade's Bloodlines 1, it's also probably the only time he's right, that his skepticism is actually proven correct, that there actually isn't, spoilers, there actually isn't an ancient vampire in the sarcophagus. I am familiar with the Caine's Chosen book, but I wasn't particularly, I didn't particularly like the premise of that book, so I actually never read it or picked it up. I know the authors, and worked with them as well on other books. I don't think we've actually written on anything vampire related together, but I'm actually not that familiar with that book. Because at that point, I think that the kind of revised vampire, I wasn't really going where I wanted to go. So at that point, I think I'd kind of wasn't fully submerged in Vampire the Masquerade. I kind of got back into vampire during Requiem and all that as a player. It's true. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry for the spoilers of 2004. Okay, I thought it was older than that even, but yes, I guess it's a 21-year-old game now, soon to be 22-year-old game. But yeah, in that regard, I would call Beckett a nodist, but he is not. I don't think he's on the Path of Caine. I would be very surprised if he was on the Path of Caine. But I would definitely call him a nodist, and I would call the adherents of the Church of the Caine nodists. And that's a good point that you bring up there, Gord, actually, which is that the Book of Nod does basically is pretty clear about diablerie, right? The diablerie is bad, don't do diablerie. It kind of says it over and over again. And the diablerists in the Book of Nod are basically portrayed as bad, as no good. So that actually kind of is a good thing for the Church of Caine, since clearly the Church of Caine, in my conception, and as far as the Sabbat are concerned in this book, are basically bootlickers. They're nodists who serve the status quo. They're kind of the official state religion of the Camarilla, and they have in the Sabbat's conception subverted nodist doctrine to serve the state, right? So they have basically taken the teachings of the Book of Nod and they highlight all the stuff that's worshipful of the elder vampires and worshipful of their traditions, which are obviously in the Book of Nod. But basically don't highlight Caine's kind of rejection of authority, rejection of divine authority specifically, and that kind of thing. So I mean, they're both choosing to highlight different things of the Book of Nod that make sense for them. Caine, obviously, in the Book of Nod, and the way Caine is portrayed, he's kind of portrayed as a shepherd of men, like people in the first city, mortals, are aware of vampires. It seems, I mean, who knows for sure, but it seems that they're aware of vampires, that they live with vampires, that vampires fed on them, and that there was some kind of symbiotic relationship with them in the first city. That seems to be the consensus drawn from the Book of Nod. And of course, in the kind of Camarilla Church of Caine conception of that, that is part of the reasons that the first city falls, because of that kind of like because there's no masquerade. The mortals are aware of the vampires, though that doesn't really seem um, you know to be true. It does, I don't. It's not the mortals who basically caused the fall of the first city. It wasn't their, you know. It's not like they came after the vampires or some such. Um, but that seems to be the lesson that the Camria puts forth for basically the masquerade. Um, and so, but of course, the Sabbat takes a very different stance from that, which is that basically, yes, mortals, we should be shepherds of mortals, but quite literally, they should be like food and servants, and we should be above them as they were in the first city, as Cain did. We should be basically their kings and their masters, and the mortals should serve us, whether as food or as literal servants and such. That seems to be the Sabbat's kind of utopian conception for how the world would work once the antediluvians are taken care of. But to be fair, even though the Sabbat are pretty supremacist in their way of thinking, to be fair, that's not really something the Sabbat has really had to grapple with. That's something that I feel like kind of revised, V20 Sabbat. They could kind of get away with grappling with that a bit more. This kind of like what happens when we're in charge concept, because obviously in the revised V20 conception, they weren't really concerned with defeating the antediluvians. They were just concerned with defeating the Camria and being in charge. So in V5, where you literally have the the antediluvians, defeating them as the focus, there's not really a lot of ideological room or headspace to really wrestle with, well, what happens when we're in charge? What happens when the antediluvians are defeated? Because the prospect of defeating the antediluvians is such a daunting endeavor that clearly the Sabbat doesn't know how they're going to do that. They're still figuring out how to do that, and they're kind of literally learning on the job, right? Because the war has already started, and they're still trying to figure out what weapon is going to work. So yeah, well, exactly. Has the Book of Nah considered that Daubery is fun? Imajad babe. It's basically true. Mortals are going to pick and choose what makes the most sense for them. You need only see how some mortals kind of take the teachings of their religious figures in a million different ways. Some think that charity is bad, and that you have to basically let people suffer, because that builds character and that kind of thing. Even though the same line of text from their book could be read to mean that you should provide succor and comfort for those less fortunate than you. You shouldn't let them suffer, potentially die, just for them to kind of learn some lesson or be self-sufficient. And I don't really think being self-sufficient is really is good religious doctrine, to be honest. I mean, any faith or religion cannot work unless it's a community. And if you're building a community of like-minded people, then obviously they need to work together, help each other, and lift each other up. You building a community of self-sufficient individuals is basically kind of an oxymoron. It's kind of this weird, I guess, objectivist and Randian kind of thought virus that unfortunately has infected far too many people, often the worst people, in the world, where basically your internal impulses are all that defines what's good in the world, and that if you're pleasing yourself, then it doesn't matter what you do to others, which is very problematic. And even when there's certain caveats about that, about like how your rights end where someone else's begin, that is not 100% true, obviously, because definitely lots of ways to coerce people to give up their rights, or basically cow people into not fighting for themselves. So if each one of us individually basically has to define our boundaries all the time, that is not a way to run any kind of society or world or government, obviously, and would be very annoying. Uh, I'm sure everyone has had the experience, has had that experience where they feel that maybe they're getting like too much information for people, or perhaps that someone is just going to assume that you're going to impinge on their personal space or rights, and that they kind of defensively, preemptively, explain things to you. Which, probably just shows that they've had the experience in the past where other people have trodden upon them and crossed their lines just one too many times, and they're just no longer willing to take the chance with a new person that they're not going to. And so, in some ways, it's kind of a self-reinforcing issue. But that's neither here nor there. All I can say is that we wanted the Devourers to have their own touchstones that were most common for them. You don't have to take these Rite as a touchstone Rite when you're on the Path of Caine. But we felt that, if we gave an example of 3 or so touchstones for each path, we could give you an idea of what it's like to be on that path and what they really, admire within the Rite. So with the Path of Caine, we did Monomancy, Vauldery, and War Party. All right, so we felt that tells you that this is a path that, all the paths kind of admire the Vauldery for, pretty obvious reasons within the Sabbat. But by including Monomancy and War Party, that reinforces that kind of like diablerie aspect that the Path of Caine partly is about empowering themselves. And I guess what it comes down to is, even though the Book of Nod says diablerie is bad, if you are basically admiring Caine and you wish to emulate Caine, there's a big problem there. In that Caine obviously is the first vampire. His generation, his blood potency is, the best. And so to get closer to Caine, taken literally, means that your blood must be empowered. And even though the Book of Nod repeatedly says not to diablerize, it even says that when Caine returns, he will curse those who have drinking the heart's blood and so on. And that like the blood will boil out of their veins and all this stuff. That doesn't really matter if you're 13th and 14th gen and you are religiously ideologically committed to being just like Caine. So you're gonna want that heart's blood probably. It's going to be something on your mind. The only way you're going to get closer to Caine, really, even though it might technically be forbidden by the strictest reading of the Book of Nod, you're going to have to dauberize. And I think in some ways you have to square that circle by basically saying that these are extreme circumstances, and that when Caine returns, he'll understand, and maybe you'll be Caine. Who knows? When maybe Caine coming back means that someone becomes Caine. Perhaps that's the truth of it, and that the Diabolists who are cursed by Caine are those who just fell short. They didn't hit the mark before. You crossed the finish line before anybody else. So too bad, all the losers in second and third place. And as kind of a throwback to older editions of Vampire, where those on Paths of Enlightenment wouldn't be able to resist frenzy or had to ride the wave or all that. We also have a bit of a narrative. There's no mechanical backing to this technically, except that so it's kind of a role play thing. There is actually no mechanical backing other than we say never. So it's assumed that if you're on this path, you never resist Fury Frenzy. That you ride the wave, target the strongest enemy in hopes of absorbing their strength. So if you're on the Path of Caine and you are prompted to a Fury Frenzy, you should ride the wave and all that. And I guess that's really up to the ST on how they want to enforce that. Okay, well, here's a question. Okay. Do Path vampires still receive a third of their humanity? Okay, sorry. To resist. I don't know why the pinning thing doesn't work anymore. It used to work once upon a time. Maybe if I put it up here, is that makes it work? Maybe. All right, so I'm just gonna mess with that for just 1 second. All right, whatever. I wish it worked. It doesn't. So on. So we'll continue. So you asked the question, Gord. You asked, do Path vampires still receive a third of their humanity added to resist frenzy tests? Death in the Soul says that Path does, but none of the others specify. So yes. So they do receive a third of their humanity added to resist frenzy tests. I think Death in the Soul specifically. Let's see here. Yes. So so all the paths. I can double check this, but from my understanding, yet again, I never want to say definitively, but yeah, all the paths as presented do get to add their. Here, I'm searching the word resist, just in case. But from my understanding of the rules that we presented here, then yeah, all the paths get that third of humanity to resist frenzy tests. The only reason that it's specified specifically in Death in the Soul is because Death in the Soul specifically says that they always resist frenzy. That they, unlike all the others, whenever frenzy is in play, they're going to try to resist. So I'm actually gonna double check that here. See, here's the path. All right, so path followers compulsions is triggered. That's another thing I'll talk about. Is each path has a compulsion in this. Similarly, when a path follower risks fury or hunger frenzy, some paths require them to ride the wave in certain situations instead of resisting. Lastly, every path has advantages a character can buy and all that. So yes, so there is the usual rules of humanity adding to resisting frenzy still apply to all the paths. The only reason it's specified specifically in Death in the Soul is because they are always commanded basically to resist frenzies regardless of the frenzy type. Unlike the other paths, who usually have a type of frenzy or a circumstance where they have to ride the wave. Basically, they have to make the ride the wave check, and should not try to resist the frenzy. And then I guess if they right, and if they I guess they could talk to their ST exactly about if they try to resist it in certain situations instead of riding the wave, and then the ST and them, I guess, could agree on whether that generates stains or harms them in some other way. But for the most part, they should just be riding the wave instead of resisting frenzy. As I mentioned before, each path has a path compulsion. So just like each clan has a compulsion, We gave each path a compulsion, and basically, whenever a compulsion is triggered, and in some other circumstances, instead of your clan or a random compulsion being triggered, you can choose as the player to roleplay and take the penalties, obviously, if necessary, of your path compulsion. For Path of Caine, obviously, it's voracious, which basically means that they try to eat the closest mortal or weaker vampires. They just can't control themselves. They're compelled to devour what's around them. Obviously, that's very dangerous, and also it reinforces the concept that these are not vampires who are comfortable or safe around mortals. Um, and obviously, mortal contact is, they see it as dangerous to them ideologically, philosophically, but it's obviously dangerous to the mortals as well. And then we give a list of example path convictions. These, of course, are the things that are going to be paired with a Rite touchstone. And I can kind of give an example of how that would work. So, looking at these example path convictions, which are not exhaustive, but hopefully you can generate some of your own just by reading them, and obviously reading this path. Their convictions: devourers choose convictions that uphold vampiric supremacy, devalue mortals, and seek to emulate a perfected vampiric existence with Caine as exemplar. All right, so like basically vampires on top, mortals on bottom, and Caine is like the perfect example of that kind of ideology, that kind of vampire lifestyle. Um, and even in the convictions, the very first one is follow Caine's example in all things, which is a kind of catch-all conviction. Um, Perhaps that is the kind of conviction that you would pair with monomancy as the Rite for that, as the touchstone Rite, since it's basically about being the not necessarily the top dog, but being as Caine-like as possible, and of course that is going to bring you into conflict, probably with other vampires, other Sabbat, maybe even vampires within your pack, and so things will have to be settled. Like who is being more Caine-like, and monomancy obviously kind of exemplifies that. Though you probably shouldn't be throwing monomancies around that often, and I think that there are certain limits to how often you actually can do monomancies and who you can monomancy described in that Rite. Um, and then the rest of them, never put a mortal before a Kenite. Failure is not an option. Faith requires action. Reject the mortal world. And then the strongest eat first. So they kind of go from very specific to something more broad, more kind of abstract. Um, Depending upon how exactly you want to play the character or what flavor of Path of Caine you're really going for. If you're going for the reject the mortal world nodist, that's obviously, there's lots of interesting convictions you could model that after. If you're going for the I want to be like Caine, I want to eat other, I want to dauberize and do that, then obviously there's convictions you could put together for that as well. Then before I get the path advantages, I will briefly, because I've got I think about 20 minutes of streaming left, or time I should say left. I want to talk about a section that we put in here called the priesthood. We thought this was pretty useful, especially since we encourage people to play priests. So we wanted basically to make it clear that if you're playing a priest or or even someone who really considered themselves or has earned the chops to be kind of a higher level adherent of one of these paths, perhaps in the Path of Caine conception, you've either been a Sabbat a long time, maybe you've dauberized a lot, perhaps you've memorized the Book of Nod, or even have some copy of the Book of Nod, or your own scraps, kind of like put together of a Book of Nod like document, or even our own book, the Oaxaca Diaries. Um, so we wanted to make it clear that in some of these paths there's differentiations between the priests and the non, the just regular laity of the path. Not always. The Path of Caine is kind of a more traditionalist path as far as the Sabbat is concerned. Um, so in this, like, the clergy of the Path of Caine are seen as traditionalists within the Sabbat and prefer to be called father or mother. Father or mother. Old-fashioned Nodists will even insist on using Latin in the performance of the Rite, a tradition that was born out of the mockery of the First Inquisition, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to give some role play guidelines and also build upon the, I guess, structure, so that in your games you could present the players with, a Path of Caine priest or priests from different packs, and you would have some conception of how to role play them and what they would be like. And also, when members of a pack basically branch out and meet other members of their path, it'll give them a conception of kind of the internal dynamics of the path. Obviously, in V5, because of the structure and concept of the Sabbat basically being decentralized, basically kind of like a, almost like decentralized cell network, not this kind of like hegemonic, vertically integrated corporation. Obviously, that would also mean that the paths are no longer as structured or as top heavy or hierarchical as they used to be. Some paths more than others, and so we wanted to basically show how the modern Sabbat, path by path, how the internal structures of those paths and their hierarchies within the paths had also changed. But we didn't really want to rebuild those structures either. So we felt that kind of detailing the priesthood was a way to get a little bit of that in there, without having to redefine it. Like, we're kind of, I'm a big fan of the book Montreal by Night, but Montreal by Night very much is a, it's a city book. So all the Sabbat really presented there are covens. So there are, sedentary packs with territorial wants and needs. And they're invested in the politics and intrigue of the city. And so, and obviously it was written during a time where the Sabbat was kind of it wasn't the revised Sabbat yet, I don't believe. I still was basically second edition Sabbat in composition, because all the vampires there are brutal. All the vampires there are basically transhumanists. I don't believe any of them are on humanity. I believe all of them are actually on paths. Some of them at very high levels, and very few of them have what we would call any kind of sense of mortal morality. That book is very much what I would call a second edition conception of a Sabbat city. So with those caveats, I still think it's a very good book. Definitely worth a read. Lots of trigger warnings. I couldn't even list all the trigger warnings. So if you're sensitive to certain subject matter, especially like gore or SA or anything like that, then that book might be very difficult for you to read. So just be aware of that. It was written, I believe, in the 90s. So there was definitely some, edgelordism, I guess is the best way to put it, there. But that doesn't detract from the book as a whole. It is a product of its time, but still a very good book with a lot of really interesting characters and a lot of very good plot points and narrative concepts and ideas to steal. And it's a little goofy. It's a little goofy. As I said in the past, While I like the idea of the Sabbat as mini cults, each pack as a mini cult, in their early conception, they were very much more like, the Warriors, the movie The Warriors. They were little gangs with a shtick, with some shtick, some bit that they were really committed to. And Montreal by Night kind of has that feel to it. Each pack it has a shtick. It has a I don't know the best word for it. Not a fetish, but each pack definitely has a thing that they're really into, and they are really committed to that bit. Um, it starts to kind of become a mini cult aspected thing. Like certain packs are definitely like there's one pack that's all about the path of nocturnal redemption, um, and some of the other packs are very committed to other things like infernalism. Um, but for the most part, they are like the Warriors. They're gangs with a funny bit, and not always funny, but often it's tongue in cheek, somewhat comical. Right? Yeah. So Puka, that's a very good point. Yeah. Toy. Um, a character from Montreal by Night is kind of I don't want to say a joke character, but basically kind of a bit of a joke character. Um, and it's kind of one of the things in Montreal by Night that almost everyone who's read the book remembers, and it resonates because it's such a ridiculous concept, but also terrifying, gross, and very Sabbat. Uh, so I won't spoil Toy for anyone, nor will I talk about Toy because it could be triggering for some people, certainly. Um, but I will say that despite all those caveats for Montreal by Night, one thing it did kind of really get into was the hierarchies of the paths, how paths crossed pack lines, that the adherents of the paths basically had their own hierarchies and their own loyalties to one another, that they had to basically balance against the loyalties to their pack, and obviously to the loyalties to the Sabbat as a whole. And that is part of the interesting parts of Sabbat play, is basically this balancing act that you're constantly having to shake. You constantly have to making suboptimal choices between all the extremes, these powers that be that are pulling you in different directions, right? So you have some loyalty to the Sabbat as a whole. You got to fight the Antediluvians. You've got to support your other Sabbat pack, other Sabbat packs. All that stuff, undermine the Camarilla, convert or kill the Anarchs, that kind of thing. So you've got that pulling you in one direction. Then, of course, you've got the pack itself, and the Valdaries therein, and the needs of your pack pulling you in another direction. You've got to get blood. You have to. Sorry if I knocked my microphone there. You have to get blood. You have to have shelter. Maybe a pack mate is having some struggle or some issue that you have to deal with. Maybe they still have a mortal touchstone and they haven't fully committed to a path. And then, that brings you to your path itself, which is another struggle, usually more internal now, that basically you have to balance against those other needs. So you have the needs of your path, which is more of an internal struggle that you have to balance against the needs of your pack mates, and then your needs of the Sabbat pack, the Sabbat sect as a whole. So in the past, that struggle was somewhat externalized because of the stratification of the paths themselves. I wouldn't recreate that. I think it was interesting in Montreal by Night that the paths kind of were, stratified a bit. I think that was mostly because of kind of the big pack in Montreal by Night was following this very kind of distinct kind of local path, the path of nocturnal redemption, that was kind of invented in that book, and they're really the only Sabbat we ever hear of who are ever on that path, really. And it's not the most well conceived path, even though it has some interesting bits and pieces in it mechanically. It works a bit different than other paths, in that they're like ebbs and flows in the individual path members. It's I don't know. It's a bit strange, but that's neither here nor there. We wanted a little taste of basically what the priesthood, the internal cohesion of these paths would be, external of you, and how you could role play that, and maybe if you wanted to, you could recreate those paths as larger cults within your world, if you wanted to. That's not really what we wanted to do, but we thought it would be interesting. I think in Path of Cathari, their priesthood, as I talked about before with the Perfecti, is a little more, I wouldn't say stratified, but there's definitely those on the Path of Cathari that others look up to, almost as saints, but certainly as mentors, that isn't really present in most of the other paths, in that they have terminology for those higher level path people, and those higher level path people, those perfecti within Cathari, have different responsibilities. They have different internally. They have different requirement. Their path has different requirements in a sense. They've reached a deeper understanding of the path to the point where their convictions are probably different than those who have a lesser understanding of the path, which is very interesting, and kind of a unique aspect of that path. And so we wanted to touch upon that without fully revealing it. That seemed like something that a player should role play as a personal journey. If a player is interested in becoming a perfecti, that is something that we wanted the ST to be able to model for them with NPCs, and then they themselves could come upon that journey, because part of that path is definitely it's kind of revelatory. Like, there's no book, there's no lesson that's going to teach you how to transcend those first fumbling steps within Cathari. You're going to have to muck around in the filth until you have your own epiphany that moves you towards the more away from the flesh prison kind of concept of Cathari to the more elevated spiritual world of Cathari, because and the ramifications of that on the greater idea of defeating the antediluvians is also very interesting from a Cathari perspective. I'd say each path probably has its own perspective on the antediluvians and how they can defeat it, and that's something we're definitely going to touch upon in the Oaxaca Diaries, and I feel that we have little seeds of that within this book. Obviously, the Path of Caine is very much about empowering yourself, becoming the most powerful vampire you can be, eating other vampires, defeating the ancients, and literally absorbing them, and then you will be powerful enough to defeat them. Maybe you'll be powerful enough to be the new Caine. And then with Cathari, obviously, they believe in a corrupted material world, which the antediluvians are clearly the epitome of that. They're obviously the epitome. They're the masters of Gehenna. They're obviously the epitome of the corrupted material world. They're almost like the personification of it, because they undermine, co-opt, control others through their weaknesses, and force them to serve them, because you're either afraid of them, or they have things you want, or you're simply just not supernaturally powerful enough, or spiritually fortified enough to resist whatever supernatural powers they bring to bear, right? But the Cathari also believe in a spiritual world, a world outside the material world, a world unshackled from the corruption that is, the flesh, from material things. So perhaps their conception. Hey, Helix, good to see you. Um, um, Whoa, wow, you're my 30th follower. My follower goal has been met. Oh my God, that's perfect. I couldn't think of a better person to be my 30th follower, actually. Um, Helix and I play D&D together and Vampire, and we've LARPed together for forever. So, yeah, no, thanks so much. Praise Caine. Very very fortuitous that they're my 30th follow. So thank you very much. You made my day. Um, but as I was saying, so potentially, yeah, very long time. So potentially the Cathari, their conception of defeating the Antediluvians could be very different than a lot of other paths, because conceptually they could be thinking that there is some kind of spiritual battle that needs to be fought. That the only way to defeat the Antediluvians is basically to transcend the mortal world or the prison of the flesh in some sense, and fight them on some kind of spiritual plane. Or perhaps there is some kind of spiritual weakness that can be uncovered in the Antediluvians, that cannot be uncovered when you're still shackled to the concerns and wants and needs of this physical world. Um, that is pretty interesting. And each path probably has a conception, values that define or at least flavor the way they would confront, defeat the Antediluvians, the way they would save the world, let's say. Um, I kind of skipped ahead the Cathari a bit, but we'll get there. They're next, in fact. We'll see. I've got about 5 minutes, a little less. Um, Feel free to ask questions if you have any. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the Path of Caine advantages. Excuse me. And this can get into some mechanical stuff, of course. So I'm not going to dive into each one of these. But basically, the advantages concept is we wanted something that would I don't want to go A, B, C, would mechanically reinforce what it means to be on the Path of Caine in interesting ways, and give you some benefit to being fully on the path. Because really, being fully on the path gave you a backstop. It basically made it so you were gonna it was gonna be much harder for you to lose that last dot of humanity, much harder for you to assail. And while that's great for a Daubry fanatic, let's say, who's basically constantly damaging their humanity by eating souls and all that, if that's not the style of play you're going for, if you're not planning on just taking humanity hits every other session, and getting seeing how low you could go, as it were, if that's not really your interest in your style of play, if you're interested in keeping balancing your mortal identity and the requirements of the path as much as possible, which is I think also an interesting style of play, then what's the benefit of the path if you're not really going to make use of the I can never lose that last dot of humanity thing there? Yeah, there's some stuff about removing stains with Raite. Yes, you don't have to worry about mortal touchstones. You not have the Raite touchstones, which on some level are maybe a little more convenient, especially in nomadic play when you're not staying in one place all the time. So we wanted some benefit to being on the path and to basically having all three path convictions, to be fully committed to the path, and that's where the path advantages come in. And we wanted those advantages to spread to the full pack. So that way, hopefully, even if there were more than one, and we wanted enough of them, so that even if there was more than one Path of Caine adherent within the pack, they could both contribute. Like one could have the Dream Warrior advantage, while another one could have lessons from Nod advantage. you wouldn't feel compelled as, one of the Path of Caine adherents in your pack to get as many of these as possible to benefit your pack. That could be someone else's job. They're nice. I don't believe they're overpowered, but they give a little bit of a benefit to the whole pack and are interesting. And to be honest, the ones that I would probably consider to be the most powerful, from my experience, are the ones players are least interested in. Simply because of the way experience is rewarded in V5. I tend to reward a lot more experience than the book suggests, and that is something that I actually have pushed within the adventures we publish. I believe the adventures we publish, like the experience guidelines that we give, are almost 3 times the experience guidelines in the V5 core book, which are, in my opinion, some of the most miserly experience guidelines I've ever encountered in my life in any game. I don't know. Maybe when they were writing the core book, they thought people would only be playing for an hour, 5 days a week or something. But like 1 experience point per player per session is just a insanely low experience threshold. Maybe that would have been doable as an experience threshold as a player for me to feel like I was actually getting someplace when I was a teenager and playing Vampire, nonstop. I guess maybe they do it different in Sweden. I guess if you only work, 30 hours a week or 20 hours a week or something, you've got all the time in the world to play 53 sessions of Vampire the Masquerade a week. I don't know. But in my experience, most people are playing the same campaign, the same chronicle of Vampire the Masquerade, maybe once or twice a month. Maybe 4 times a month that's a group of people who are really playing very often. But in most of what I've heard in my experience, most people are playing, once or twice a month. Most chronicles don't really last longer than 6 to 7 games. That is basically, on the average, almost a half a year of gaming is maybe 8 games, 10 games tops. But 6 or 7 seems to be when Chronicles games seem to fall apart. That's true for D&D as well, just on averages. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, and you can tell really good stories in 6 or 7 games, especially if the games are, 4 or 5 hours long each, though on average most games are 2 to 3 hours. So 1 experience point per session, you really can't even buy a new discipline dot at the lowest levels by the time the game is over, which does not seem well thought out. So that is to say that one of the more powerful Path of Caine advantages, let's say, and all of them have a similar advantage to this. Let's say lessons from Nod, right? So all pack mates can buy blood sorcery as if it was a clan discipline. That's a 3-dot advantage, right? And once per story, when the pack priest performs the Vaudry, they can place a beneficial blood sorcery ritual they know upon the entire pack. Casting a ritual level 3 or higher in this way requires the entire pack to have the proper path resonance. So in this case, Path of Caine's path resonance is phlegmatic. And yeah, I thought that was interesting. Like, resonance, I feel, is an underutilized mechanical aspect in V5, though a very interesting one. I see why it's underutilized, because it's a little finicky the way it's implemented. And I think people are hesitant to basically tie it to other mechanics. I've written discipline powers that have, resonance kickers. Famously in Vampire the Player's Guide, the Gorgon Scales level 4 fortitude power, which actually the original version I think is much, much better than what appeared in the book, but it is what it is. I'm not here to critique editors or power balancing. They want the power balancing in a certain way, and that's fine by me. They paid for the words, so it's the words. It's whatever words they want, they get. So like Gorgon Scales was like a level 4 fortitude power, where the resonance that you have determines like what kind of resistance against certain powers you get. Um, as we all know, the kind of baseline level 4 fortitude power in the core book is very underwhelming. So I felt like a good level 4 fortitude power was needed, and I felt like playing with resonance. So with Gorgon scales, basically your resonance, you activate the power, and the resonance you currently have determines what kind of resistance you get. And I believe, I mean, maybe they edited this out, but if I remember correctly, you could forego the blood cost of the power by basically losing your resonance. If I remember correctly, that might not be the way it's actually written now. I don't remember the exact changes. I just remember I didn't agree with all the changes that were made. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'll just continue with lessons from Nod. So lessons from Nod, basically for 3-point advantage, if you're on the Path of Caine, obviously is the only way you can get it. For a 3-point advantage, you are giving everybody a price break on the blood sorcery discipline. Basically, they're all paying a lower experience cost for it. Now, obviously, not everybody's going to be interested in taking blood sorcery. The lower levels of blood sorcery aren't that great. Who else? And then, of course, even if you want the rituals, you have to blow experience to get those. And the lower level rituals aren't even that impressive. But most importantly, while it sounds cool to basically have a 4th discipline at clan discipline prices, most people aren't going to take advantage of that. So it's not really a merit. People are going to, even though it's technically, in my opinion, one of the more powerful, advantages you can have to basically, you have a 4th clan discipline. Cool. In practice, it's not really that useful, unfortunately, simply because of the way experience works. And if you're playing a certain clan, if you really want blood sorcery, you're going to take a clan that has blood sorcery. And to be fair, one of the best clans, has blood sorcery, Banu Hakim. So, you don't really have much of excuses if you want blood sorcery to play something other than that. I know there's another clan with blood sorcery, but it's escaping my mind. No, I'm joking. The Tremere, obviously, as well. These advantages off of the paths, as you can see, they go. There's 1 level 1, 2 level 2s, and 2 level 3 advantages. You don't buy them in order. You can buy them piecemeal. If you want Strange Blood, let's say, the 2-point merit, you don't have to buy Dream Warriors. You don't have to buy Enochians, and so on and so forth. Just like you can buy Feast of Dreams without buying any of the others. And the only real limitation is that, obviously, you have to be on the path. And B, you can only buy a path advantage if you have as many convictions as the level of the advantage in that path. So, if you want, let's say, lessons from Nod, which we were talking about before, which basically makes blood sorcery clan discipline for everybody in the pack, that would mean that you would have to have 3 Path of Caine convictions. You'd basically have to be full up. You'd be fully walking the path to have that. So it's also kind of a signifier to the pack as well, that you're kind of the real deal, that you are a real true blue Nodist Path of Caine devourer, a true believer, as it were. While the other ones, you wouldn't necessarily have to be fully walking the path to get them, other than Feast of Dreams, the other level 3. Basically, the advantages are, lessons from Nod shows. The advantages obviously are focused on what that path does well and what they're interested in, and other kind of core themes within that path. So obviously, blood sorcery is a power that those on the Path of Caine think it's very powerful. It can it can increase your generation, basically your blood potency at the higher levels. It can boil blood. It's basically the blood magic power. So those on the Path of Caine be very interested in it. They can also like test a vampire's generation blood potency to see if they're worth eating. Also pretty useful, as well as all the cool rituals like flying around. In fact, with lessons from Nod, you could technically um, cast that ritual, the flight ritual, on the whole pack at once, which makes for a very scary evening for somebody. Um, and then beyond that, obviously, we wanted to call back to Cain himself, the Book of Nod, the Land of Nod, which obviously uh, comes from myth. And that's why it's also like the land of dreams, the land of Nod. As we say, we go to dreamland, we nod out, we take a nod, that kind of thing. So dreams and nod are kind of intertwined linguistically, which I find interesting. And perhaps the land of Nod was not a physical space, but a metaphysical space, as contended, I think, in Revelations of the Dark Mother and in mage work. I mean, Mage of the Ascension, not magic, IRL or whatever, as in Mage of the Ascension. That basically there was a time when reality and thought were kind of mixed, a time when basically dreams and the material world were one and the same. Perhaps that had something to do with the conception of the Land of Nod. Uh, Perhaps. Who knows? That's a bit reaching. But more importantly, dreams are often prophetic and mystical and ecstatic. And there's something about dreams which tap into this concept of something ancient, something like buried within us, within our subconscious, some kind of like truth that gets past the facade of the world we see around us, the material world. And so we felt that, but also occulted, hidden. To interpret a dream can take you a lot of different places. A dream isn't a clear sign. It doesn't really tell you what's happening. You have to interpret and analyze the dream. So we felt that fit with the Nodists very well. This kind of like prophetic um, through line, this kind of mystical nature of them. So there are some powers dealing with dreams within the Path of Caine, including being able to like communicate through dreams to packmates and stuff like that, and to like other Sabbat, which kind of gets past their nomadic lifestyle a little bit. It kind of gives them a little bit of an ability to communicate over large distances, though obviously not necessarily in a clear, concise way. And beyond that, we also wanted to get into the idea that those on the Path of Caine would be drinking lots of weird blood, and so perhaps they would be hard to pin down as vampires. That's kind of like the strange blood thing. And then lastly, there is the idea of Cain as the city builder, Cain the architect. I played a Masonic Sabbat once, Malkavian Antitribu, who basically used lots of Masonic imagery and concepts, metaphysical and real. And it was a very interesting character. I don't think I was the pack priest, but I think I was actually like the abbot. I was in charge of the haven and all that stuff, which was perfect because like I was really into the architecture and the metaphysical planar space and all that of the haven. And by basically thinking of Cain as the builder, Cain is the builder of the first city, like the literal first city, as far as the Book of Nod says. Like he actually built the first city ever, not just the first city of vampires or whatever. So kind of Cain the architect, Cain the builder, and that So we talk about how basically those on the Path of Caine are kind of like innately in tuned to mortal cities. And possibly even like getting around mortal cities, though not necessarily mortal institutions, so that they can kind of avoid mortals a lot better than other Sabbat, and so that is another advantage they could give their pack. Um, I got into a little more detail than I wanted to there about the individual advantages. Certainly happy to answer any questions, but I'm actually getting to the end of my time, which is great. I kind of just wanted to finish off the Path of Caine. And next time, I'll start off on Path of Cathari and answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you so much for watching. I will download the stream and put it, on YouTube for everybody. And I've been trying to experiment with like clips and all that. I put up some clips I thought were pretty good. But yeah, there we go. As I said, feel free to message me, send questions or whatever, and I'll try to answer them. Not just privately, but also on stream, so everyone can benefit from your questions. All right. Well, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Pray